And now we are starting with a deeper dive into the Open RAN universe. I'm especially looking forward to the outlook on how policies and industry together can make Open RAN successful. Please welcome on stage for our first keynote, Dr. Kim Larsen, with the update on the techno-economical state of the industry. Kim, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Let's start with, I don't have a timer here, I had that yesterday, so it's too far away. Oh, okay. Oh, there. Well, I mean, you know, men at my age, anyway, let's not go further. So I have I was asked to give a sort of kind of opening of where are we with Open RAN. Where are we with Open RAN? Thank you so much. And another thing here, and I told Katja and Andreas and others, well, I've not always been a fan of Open RAN, many of the aspects of that. So are you really sure? And they said, yeah, Kim, don't just do it. So if anybody afterward wants to blame anybody, blame Katja. But to be honest, I am not going to, of course, trash Open RAN because it's something that I've been part of since 2018, when we initially started out in XRAN, and then 2016 XRAN. Later on, we got merged with ORAN, and the rest is history, right? So let me start with this one very quickly. One of the themes over the last 10 years, or maybe even longer, has been disaggregation. I don't think you can open any LinkedIn page, go to any conference without hearing people talk about disaggregation. Let's pull things apart as much as we can because we can, and just let's do it. And it's almost been a religious mantra. One of my good friends, when I told him I was coming here, you're going to this religious sect forum and talk about your religion about disaggregation Open RAN. And I said, no, I think that's maybe going too far, because from the last 2 days, I've actually seen that most of us are actually skeptical but optimistic. There are things that we like and there are things that we don't like. And you know what? Isn't that always the case with technology? I do think personally that we have gone a bit too far on disaggregation. I think there are things that make total sense. Disaggregating hardware and software, that makes good sense. If you have two entities in a system where they scale very differently, taking these two apart and working on them separately makes good sense. I also do think that there is a cultural aspect of pulling things apart. And if you look into this, it's an area of interest that I've been digging into quite a lot lately as I'm getting older, is that if you look at Open RAN and a lot of the topics we discuss here, it really came out of the brains of a Germanic-centric engineering culture, Asian-centric in terms of Japan and South Korea. And what are they great for? They're great of best of all breeds. We want very narrow focus and dedication to components and make the best, and then we integrate them and we have the best of the best system we can possibly get. I'm from Denmark, so I'm part of that culture, if anybody would think I'm now standing there and pointing fingers. I pointed at myself too, and I have been part of this journey. But it's something that is good to reflect on, that as you are an opinion maker, which Deutsche Telekom and Germany and South Korea and Japan are in this field, you also take your cultural baggage with you as you go into the R&D, develop it, and ultimately also operate it. So this is a word of caution. What was the promises here? We wanted freedom of choice. We thought we paid too much to our suppliers, and we wanted to break them up, so we were actually able to pay less. And of course, you could say RAN is a multiplier, because we have so many of these. They don't need to be very expensive in order for making the total very expensive, very costly. And typically for the mobile industry, 60% of our capital investment has gone into RAN. If you look at the technology OpEx, it's probably about 50, 60% as well of that goes into the RAN. So it is a very costly thing, and if you can reduce the CapEx for this, isn't that a great goal? I also think there was a worry of being locked into a supplier, although I would be cynical in saying that we have all done that open-heartedly as soon as that supplier gave us the right pricing we liked, which were a lot lower than maybe European alternatives. But let's not go into that debate here, which is a bit interesting in Germany in particular, and Spain, I guess. Intelligence at scale. We all in the time of 1618 had this idea that we certainly needed more intelligence. At that time, we talked about data science, machine learning, clever statistical tools to understand better what was happening in our networks, to try to get a handle on complexity. Billions of data points were generated over a day, and very little of that was used. It was, by the way, also the time when we believed that we could monetize big data. I don't think any of us has been terribly successful in that, and we often forgot, well, all that data, maybe we can use this ourselves to actually become more efficient, smarter, and intelligent in the way we actually operate our networks. So intelligence at scale was and became a very important point, and I think that is particular something that we need to keep in the back of our mind and still might actually make this whole journey we have done over the last almost 10 years worthwhile. Of course, we all realize that maybe short term, maybe not the most economical, smart way what we were going to do, but maybe we believe over long term that this also could be a cost-efficient solution. I do want to make the claim that in general, when you split up systems and architectures, you do not become more economically efficient because you create more interfaces. And simply what you save by splitting up, you actually pay back in interfaces. But if you add a digital dimension to this, you may end up with something that is very sensible and also economically sound. And that's, of course, what we believe will happen. I think we shouldn't kid ourselves, and I think that's already clear from my start. O-RAN is not an exercise of simplicity. We haven't made things simpler by going down this road, because we want the best of breed. We want every single element in this chain of our architecture to be the best. And we break up interfaces that before were maybe not that open, but did honestly worked, as far as we know at least, because we look into them, but a different point. So don't kid yourself. By the way, often the rigs, the RAN intelligent controllers are sort of highlighted as something that's fantastically innovative and actually something that came as we integrated XRAN with O-RAN. Mind you, XRAN was very much about just splitting up the CPA interface between the RU and the base station and the RU, the base band unit and the RU, sorry to be totally accurate. The intelligence and having a mean of supporting intelligence in the network came out of the self-optimized network architecture that also actually at that time was just being standardized by 3GPP for 4G, having an offline element and having an online element. Mind you, this was not a box. It was a set of functions. And that was then taken over by O-RAN and basically made into architectural entities, and at least one of them is actually a box, and the other one normally is seen as being embedded into the SMO, the service manager and orchestration that we have in the O-RAN, which I didn't put here. So very clearly, if you look at simplicity, you couldn't get it more simple than the left side, and actually, as we moved on, we've broken up this and made it in generally more complex. Alas, of course, the rig is a new architectural element that we have added to this, but it doesn't make it simpler. Quite the opposite. Right, so can we learn from IT? And of course the answer is, even if probably most of us are network folks, we say, no, we don't look to this side, they don't know what network is and they don't have any idea about quality. They're software people, and we don't like software people because, again, this is sort of a bit flossy and artistic. And of course that's not true at all, because we really like software, because if we want to get this to work, we actually need to get our S together when it comes to developing software, probably much more than hardware, because that's something we generally do understand. So can we learn from IT? And I think most of us has been in the industry and operators, we were used to huge, complex IT projects that took money away from our networks because it just could not get it to work. And every time they made a small change, it was another 100 million that you had to post into this. And often, a lot of that are custom made and lots of different suppliers, and were difficult to handle and never probably worked as well as we thought it would. By the way, that's for me is a key example of best in breed. You take the best of what you can find out there, you put it together, you use huge amount of CapEx and development and people effort to integrate this to something that hopefully works a bit like what you had intended. And I'm not saying that this is like O-RAN. This is more complex than O-RAN, and certainly we helped it in being much more complex than O-RAN. Where are we today in IT? I think most operators are actually going towards best of suit, which is sort of the right side, where instead of trying to integrate multiple boxes at each on an individual level, maybe the best you can buy for money, this is just so huge and complex to deal with for an operator. And yes, if you are a Telefonica and a Vodafone or a Deutsche Telekom and you have massive amount of people in your organization that are fairly young, you can of course throw them at this problem. But most of us are not in that privileged situation any longer. I mean, most of us in our industry is 50 plus, right? And, well, we don't have the stamina to work on this. So what are operators doing in many places of the world is actually going towards best of suit, and this is actually what you see here. And they are discovering, no surprise, that actually operationally makes life a hell of a lot easier. What a surprise. What a surprise, right? And it also expects it's just less cost. And yes, they do get to some extent stuck with a supplier or a solution integrator, but that's nowhere near the lock-in they had from their best-of-breed solution. And if you look at the total cost of ownership and not just what you invest up front, and the uncertainty and risk you have with going the traditional way of IT, that actually is something that most operators today embrace. And it doesn't necessarily mean that every single box or architectural entity is from the same supplier, but it means I have one supplier that provides me a solution. They have worked with open interfaces. They make sure that that whole stack actually works. And I only have one to blame, not 10 or 15. I mean, this is crazy, right? Most of our network people say what happened in IT in the 10s was just amazing. We look at all the money we pumped into this to actually change it again because it didn't work. It's an interesting story. Now, how much money is there in this? What is the money? I've done a lot, and you can find that also online on looking at CapEx spend, the revenue over since the very beginning of our mobile industry, or telecom industry, which I say the beginning is pretty much for GSM. Sorry for some of the older folks that was used to fixed before 90s, but for me that's the beginning. Certainly beginning of spending a lot of CapEx, a lot of money into this. There has been highs. We spend a lot of money around 3G, UMTS. This is just including the active CapEx. It's just really the RAM. It's not building sites. It's not passive building the infrastructure, because that's a whole different story, although it actually does follow a bit this trend. But what you see is that it was high. 4G, we started introducing lots of different frequencies, went from just having 900, 1800 to having 800, 2300, 2500, whatever. Massive, not massive, but we started doing MIMO deployments, etc. So some of that it reflected there. And actually, people say, oh, 5G, it's enormous. But the fact of the matter is, it's actually not really where we spend most of the money. Of course, in Germany, if you are on mobile, you probably suffer a bit from the society's focus is to build out fiber. And if you look at Germany's state of fiber deployment, it is a laggard in Europe. And it probably will take another 10, 15, 20 years before you're there on fiber, right? So there is a lot of reasons for why more money goes into fiber than maybe initially we would have liked if we were in the mobile part. So just saying here that, yes, there are money in this, but it actually, well, I would like to have just 10% of this, 1% of this, but it is not the same as a total capital spent in the mobile industry as such. So again, from this point, can we learn from IT? I think there are many learnings. We can learn both what we shouldn't do and obviously what we should do. And I think there are a lot of interesting developments in TM Forum on openness and structure of processes and that are very worth embracing and looking at also for network people. Again, there's lots of text on this, and I would say don't focus too much on this. The whole idea is that we had a period, and again, it's a period where we were very, I think, naive, like we often are in the infancy and as children, starting to learn something new, that we could break everything up and we could just go out and choose any vendor we wanted and mix it together. This is quite an extreme view, right? I mean, if you're a greenfield, you might try to do something like that. But if you're a sensible operator with millions of customers, I don't think you would be crazy enough. I hope you wouldn't be crazy enough to pursue the middle one. But that was what we discussed. And that's what I think Andreas and many labs around the world are facing, it is to try to test all these different choices and how you put things together. And of course, this is a simplification. Start looking at all the interfaces we have in here, and then the combinations of interfaces with combinations of suppliers. And if you do that math, which I actually have in this presentation, but was not allowed to show because of time, and I understand the time aspect. So, yes, we are going towards the right side, maybe not as extreme as you see here, although if you talk to the people on the ground, you have a bit of feeling that we're moving towards here. So, can we reframe O-RAN? And should we do? Well, first of all, my message to you is we should do that because it respects the people that we have working for us trying to get this to work. It is not an open for all, full plug and play fest, O-RAN. It just cannot be. It makes absolutely no sense for a credible operator with millions of customers to pursue this. They will go into the same trap as we had with IT and best of breed. Best of suit, or as close to best of suit, is my recommendation. AI RAN, or AI in RAN, or AI on RAN, or whatever permutation you would like, is required. We have to work much more dedicated to include intelligence in an open and honest and flexible and ethical way in our systems. And there are a lot of policies around this because this goes into our critical infrastructure. But we need to do it, and we need to think about it. And again, we have to do it intelligently, because of course you can put AI everywhere. That's not really the challenge, but we have to do it in a sensible way, in an intelligent way. Just because you can do something does not always mean you should do it. And then finally, which is a bit of the first one, well, we think about AI, automation, and scale. I do believe that it will bring down the cost of O-RAN. Maybe not even long term, which is, somewhere out 20 years from now, or in 6G maybe, but probably more medium term than what we are currently seeing. So I still have 38 seconds, and I think that's without question. So I want to make a prediction. I think the rigs will go away. I think that learning from IT, the rigs we have today, in particular the standalone, will disappear, and you will have an API-based RAN architecture similar to what we today also talk in many aspects of IT. So with that, thank you so much.